It has been a tumultuous week for Israel and for the Jewish diaspora, and I am not the only rabbi who has received several emails and phone conversations expressing profound concern, not only from active members, but from individuals who have long ceased to have an association with the synagogue. What are you doing, they ask. How are you expressing the LJS's concern for the events that have taken place in Israel this week? We are too often led by the headlines of newspapers and journals, opinions expressed online, social media pages, and by those whose voices are heard loudest. How should we speak about these things from the pulpit? How should we express ourselves when we do not live in the state of Israel and can only look on with sadness and longing? I want to share a couple of observations with you this morning. One from our Torah portion that we've just heard, and the other emerging from the painful and feverish conversations, articles and podcasts that have been written and taken place over the past week in the wake of the Knesset's passing of legislation abolishing the reasonableness doctrine, the measure which the Supreme Court in Israel employs to evaluate government policies. The reasonableness doctrine, as others more well-versed than I am will know, is not unique to Israel. It's a practice used by high courts here in the UK, in Austria, Australia, and Canada, among other countries. The doctrine operates exactly as it sounds. The court determines whether a given government policy is sensible and sound. The example most frequently quoted with reference to Israel is when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appointed Shas party leader Aryeh Deri as Minister of Finance. The Supreme Court determined, based on the reasonableness doctrine, that he was not eligible to serve due to previous convictions of bribery, fraud, and various tax offences, among other things. The Knesset has now made this type of judicial oversight impossible, weakening the power of the judiciary, strengthening the hand of this government, and destabilizing Israeli democracy. The intensity of the protest movement on the streets of major cities in Israel reached a climax this week in what one might call a moment of existential crisis that focused not only on the government's misplaced triumph in passing the legislation, the opposition boycotting the vote by walking out, but also in religious, spiritual terms, because it came just days before Tisha B'Av, the fast commemorating the destruction of both temples and many other catastrophes throughout our Jewish history, including the Shoah. On the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, I was actually on my way back after a 10-hour flight from visiting my daughter in San Diego. I attended a Zoom gathering for colleagues, gathering that included colleagues here in the UK, in Israel, and also in Europe, to contemplate what the day might mean for us in the light of the current situation. And I was struck by a conversation between two participants, one a rabbi who ministers in a community in Amsterdam, and the other a Prague-born, married to a rabbi, but who's been a citizen of Israel for the past 30 years. And this is the first observation that I want to share with you. I don't want to simplify their words, But there was a moment in the conversation that I caught in my kind of jet-lagged fudge when my colleague in Amsterdam reflected on what it was like to live in a city where the memories of the Shoah, the Holocaust, are still so present. And for anyone who has visited Amsterdam, those words will resonate. The Auschwitz Memorial, a cracked mirror on the ground in a small piece of parkland, reflecting a crack in the heavens. The Hollandsche Schouwburg Theatre, where Jews were held after having been rounded up and from where they were deported, now a place of memorial with the walls covered in the names of those who were murdered, and the transformation of 4 historic synagogues, once thriving centers of Jewish life, and now the Jewish Historical Museum. And of course, the remnant communities whose survivors bear the deep, barely healed scars of being hidden children, losing parents, grandparents, and other family members. All of these things are so present when you visit Amsterdam, and particularly for those who live in Amsterdam. For this colleague, Tamara Benina is her name, what was happening in Israel this week was another catastrophe. And on this Tisha B'Av, this day of lament and remembering previous catastrophes, she was lamenting the state of Israel. She was lamenting the threat to democracy, to human rights, Israel's disintegration as she saw it, which she saw as fast becoming a theocratic autocracy. But her words were tempered immediately by Yana Marcus's in Israel. "Don't write us off," she said. "Don't lose faith in us. We are a young country, 75 years old. It takes a long time to create a society in which Jews, Muslims, Druze, Bedouin, Christians, and others can all live together peaceably. We have done well," she said, "but we have a long way to go. Don't give up on us." And those words were echoed in a podcast which I listened to yesterday from the Hartman Institute in Israel, 3 leading teachers who all agree that the struggle to retain Israel's democracy and liberal values and to create a state for all its citizens, and of course peace with its neighbors, isn't over yet. It will take 3 years, they said. And although, of course, they expressed their sadness, their anger, their indignation, their energy to fight for liberal Jewish values had not yet expended itself. The bleak despair that we have absorbed here is not the emotion experienced by the protesters. There is a sense that they can and will win this battle against a prime minister who wants all or nothing and will brook no compromise. Between Amsterdam and Tel Aviv, between Berlin and Jerusalem, between London and Haifa, between the burdens and losses of the past and the expectations and prospects for the future, there may be a world of difference in perception and lived experience. Where and how we are situated will inevitably determine how we see the future. "Please be patient with us," said Yana Marcus, offering not despondency, but patience and hope. In that vein, I want to end with my second observation, a commentary to our Torah portion this morning by one Rav Moshe Yehuda Lieb Zaks. I couldn't seem to find anything out about this Rebbe, other than the fact that he was the father-in-law of Rabbi Chaim Yaakov Stein, who was obviously slightly more famous than he was, who was born in Lithuania, this is Rabbi Chaim Stein, in 1913, and died in America in 2011, having made an extraordinary escape, by the way, via the Far East from Lithuania at the beginning of the war. Rabbi Chaim Stein's obituary refers to Harav Moshe Yehuda Leib Sachs, a brilliant scholar from Russia. So he was probably born in the last half or third of the 19th century. Whether he died before or during the war, whether he survived, I'm not sure. This rabbi, Rav Moshe Yehuda Leib, compares part of the passage we read this morning with verses that are similar in next week's Torah portion in Parashat Eikev from Deuteronomy chapter 8. And these two passages, he says, are concerned with one and the same subject. But actually, when you look closely at them, there are significant differences. Deuteronomy 6, as I said earlier, according to rabbinic interpretations, refers to those things that the Israelites will find ready-made when they go into the land: flourishing cities, houses full of good things, hewn cisterns, vineyards and olive groves already planted. Idolatry is completely forbidden, but curiously, the Talmud and Maimonides and other commentators state that all other benefits, whether permitted or forbidden by Jewish law, are actually allowed because of the particular circumstances of entering the land. This is also Nachmanides' interpretation. It may be because these are the soldiers, these are the first people to go into the land, and they may be hungry, and their circumstances may be constrained. So all these things are allowed to them. Even pork, says some of the commentators, which says the Talmud actually, which seems really quite extraordinary. But look closely at the second passage up there, Deuteronomy 8, just 2 chapters ahead. The warning against taking the blessings of the land for granted is still there. But these verses refer to the natural blessings of the land and our partnership with its resources after the conquest. Our work to build the agriculture, to mine from the rocks, building of houses, the growing of our herds and flocks, the creation of prosperity. And you'll notice down there in the yellow font that there's one extra verb that is added to the phrase, which is also in Deuteronomy 6, V'achalta v'savata, you shall eat and be satisfied. And that verb is not in that first passage. It's the verb uverachta, you shall bless, from the word baruch, levarech, which can also be translated as to give thanks, to praise the Eternal One, your God, for the good land which God has given to you. To paraphrase the more detailed interpretation of Rav Moshe Yehuda Leib, the omission of the word uverachta, you shall give thanks, from Deuteronomy 6, invites the question, how can we express thanksgiving with a full heart for the things for which we did not work, that represent the losses and anguish of others? These passages that deal with the land of Israel, with possession, inheritance, expulsion, do not always sit easily with us in our own time. Yet for the Torah still to be relevant to us, we must find ways to reinterpret these small but significant omissions and inclusions between the suffering and hardship of the past and present and the promise of being able to give thanks in the future with a full heart, there is the patient labor of planting our literal and metaphorical vineyards and olive groves, hewing cisterns, symbols of dialogue and peace, so that everyone shall sit under their grapevine and fig tree, with no one ever to disturb them again. Kain Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.